Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, sorry, I just ran up the stairs. My name is Ioana. I am a lawyer and a researcher. I recently completed my PhD in law and technology. And my main focus right now is on the use of algorithms and algorithmic tools in decision making. So the way they're used by judicial decision makers, this comprising judges but also arbitrators. I'll just use the space bar. So in this presentation today, I want to explore the limits of using these tools. And as a background for this discussion, I will employ the dichotomy of primary agency versus secondary agency. What I refer to as primary agency is usually described in the literature by three core elements, namely intentionality, rationality, and moral responsibility when we talk about human agency. Intentionality means that the agent acts with purpose, so is capable of intentional action. Rationality means that actions are guided by reasoning, so by desires, by beliefs, goals, and it also implies the capacity for planning. And moral responsibility is something that relates to human agency only, where because we think that this certain category of agency that we see in humans is also also has the element of awareness or consciousness, we can assign accountability to human agents and moral responsibility. But if we look generally at all the definitions on primary agency, we can observe that the concept of choice is essential to primary agency. So, of course, choice comes on a spectrum. You can say that, for example, slime mold executes and makes decisions when they solve mazes. There are studies that have been described in scientific journals such as Nature by Nakagaki, Yamada, and Toth, where a slime mold, a very basic organism, can solve a puzzle. So basically you put them in a maze and you place food at the end of the maze, and they need to find their way to the food. And they successfully do that in very interesting ways, not the same way. So if you have different organisms, they will find different ways to achieve the same goal. And we can say that they do have intentionality, so they do act with intention. And they also have some sort of rationality as they are able to plan their way through that maze. And this is one end of the spectrum where they kind of make choices to attain their goals, to get to the food. At the other end of the spectrum, you have, for example, a human who chooses a career or a place to live in, and that is a much more complex choice, which entails many different subsets of choices. So, with primary agency, the main, the gist of it is that it relates to choice, and some would say that this kind of also entails, I wouldn't say free will, but from a myriad of possibilities, the agent is capable of selection. Whereas with secondary agency, we do not see the same process. Secondary agency is by definition mechanical, delegated, and even if highly complicated, is ultimately prescriptive. So we can't look at an algorithm and identify an inherent intention in it or rationality, planning that is outside what the algorithm was programmed to do. Now, if we think about intelligent agents, so again, intelligence is a spectrum, but intelligent agents in the human sense, there is a very interesting definition by Cox in metacognition and computation that says that when confronted with a choice, an intelligent agent must be able to decide the following: which action, given the possible ones, is the most adequate in the present situation. Then, if the choice he is making is sufficiently informed, or if more information is required. And lastly, if something has gone wrong, to understand why it happened. So, having this background of primary versus secondary agency in mind, I then ask, what is an AI agent? Do we have primary AI agents? As of now, I'm not aware that we have primary agents in the AI world, because primary agency, as we define it, is restricted to organic life. As we discussed before, as I described in the previous slide, we do see some sort of agency with basic organism, and then if we look at the whole spectrum up to humans. But we are not aware of any primary AI agents yet that kind of comprise intentionality, rationality, and moral responsibility. What we do have is secondary AI agents, and these are tools that we use for example, credit scoring, resume screening. I use them in legal case analysis, and they're using content moderation in medical diagnosis. They have a wide array of applicability, and the most interesting use case to me in judicial decision making. But why do we use them? So we don't have primary AI agents, but we can ask how we would use them. I think we would use them to make decisions for us, or to kind of not only delegate decisions, because this is what we already do with secondary agents, but make decisions for us. As in, you would be able to have an AI judge or an AI doctor that would need no human input, because that is kind of the scope of primary AI agency. That would be full agency. With secondary AI agents, we use them for efficiency. So we use them for their speed. They're very good at analytical tasks, and therefore for cost cutting as well. So instead of using like 5 interns, we use an AI tool to do legal case analysis for us, and that is way cheaper and sometimes more accurate if we use the tool correctly. We also use them for exploration, because they are statistical machines and they use probability. We can explore many possibilities much faster than a human would be able to. And also for improved results, and that is debatable. There is an argument that they are far more accurate than a human would be. Then, if these tools are so wonderful, why do we have so many questions about them, and what is the point where we start kind of needing to limit them? With primary AI agents, we don't have primary AI agents yet, so the whole discussion is very theoretical. It's a discussion of what if. And I think the limits are scientific and conceptual at this point. They are not practical limits. And the main debates in the doctrine are whether there is a connection between organic life, intelligence, and agency. Do we need vulnerability in order to develop intelligence? And there is an argument in Antonio Damasio's work that goes along as such and says that life emerged, so life developed intelligence because life is vulnerable. So intelligence is something that protects the purpose of life, of conserving itself and kind of reproducing. If you don't have vulnerability, then there is no purpose for intelligence. There is also the argument of Peter Godfrey Smith in Evolutionary Biology and Consciousness about the mind-body problem. Can we have minds without bodies? Do minds need to be embodied? Again, that's a very scientific debate, and I don't think it has practical application as of now. But the main issues are what's the role of sentience, and can non-organic objects ever develop primary agency? So do you need a body, an organic body, in order to develop agency and intelligence? And this is way beyond my kind of scope of research, and also I do not have the background, the necessary background in science to answer those questions. What I'm interested in is secondary agents, because they do have practical applicability and we already use them. And in particular with decision making, we use them to assist us. We use them as tools in order to make our lives easier when we want to come to conclusions. And the limits of secondary AI agents are not merely theoretical or scientific. It's not something we can't pinpoint. It's something we already know, but we need to implement at the regulatory level. And with secondary agents, I listed the main limits, which are first, the automation bias, which is the tendency to suspend critical thinking and to transfer responsibility to the machine. So it is unusual for individuals, apparently, to defy algorithmic recommendations. And this has been proven again and again in cognitive and behavioral literature by Gravett, by Thaler, by Hannah Moffat. There is a wealth of resources on this. Then we have the technology effect, which is similar to technological optimism. So this is the implied association between technology and success. And it's also proven in the literature that humans, especially those under high cognitive loads, such as judges, trust technology more than they should. And this is also because they want to share responsibility with someone or something. And being under pressure, the fact that a tool makes a recommendation kind of comes as a relief to them when they don't know what to choose. Then we have the efficiency limit, because we do use these tools to make us, to help us make decisions. And it's not efficient to trace back their reasoning. So even if we could detangle all the probabilities in the algorithm, it is not efficient to do so because we use the tool in the first place because it's faster. So it gives us an advantage of efficiency. So if we say, okay, the algorithm gave me this result, now let's check to see if the result works. We don't do that because we wouldn't be using the tool in the first place if we had that time. Then there is the proprietary nature of these algorithms. So even if we had the time to look back into the algorithm, most of these algorithms are developed by companies who cover these algorithms with the trade secret, they don't cover them, but they are already covered under the law by the trade secret. So they make money out of them, they sell them to the state or to other companies, and they wouldn't make any money if they would disclose to you how the algorithm works. Then there is the black box of the algorithm, which is, again, going back to the talk in the first half of the panel, from my point of view, more of an issue of complicatedness and not of complexity, because there is an argument that these algorithms are statistical tools and they do work on mathematics and probability. So if we had the processing power to kind of quickly look into them and redo the math, we would be able to say why and how they did what they did. Thing is, we don't have the processing power, so in order to look into the math, we would need to wait for another 100 years, which is not possible in the practical world. So this is not the black box that we see in the human mind. It's the black box of complicatedness and the lack of processing power. Then we have the limit of systemic crashes, where even if we were able to look into an algorithm and detect an error, if we change that element that is an error, then that would lead to a systemic crash most of the time, because these algorithms are employed on a very large scale. Think a justice system. So if we discover an error in an algorithm that makes predictions in a criminal law case, and we change that error, what would this mean for previous cases? For example, defendants that were wrongly accused, for what we do on the next trial, and so on. So there is a high risk of systemic crashes. And lastly, the issue of role reversibility, especially in algorithms that are employed in decision-making. There is also an argument, especially developed by Frank Pasquale, that only a human should make decisions for a human, because the human who sentences another human must be aware of the fact that he could be sentenced or she could be sentenced as well in the same scenario. So that would enhance the accountability of the one making the judgment. And this brings me to the case study. This is a Supreme Court case in America, in Wisconsin State versus Loomis, in which such an algorithm was used. So Eric Loomis, as you can see on the screen, a quick background for the case, had pleaded guilty to eluding an officer and unauthorized use of a vehicle after being charged in connection with a drive-by shooting. And the pre-sentence report included a COMPASS score labeling the defendant as high risk for recidivism. COMPASS is an algorithm that kind of evaluates the risk of a certain person to reoffend. And the sentencing judge referenced the score gave by this algorithm, along with other factors, when denying probation and imposing a 6 years in prison sentence with extended supervision. And then Loomis argued that the use of this algorithm infringed his constitutional rights because, first, he was not treated as an individual, so he was not judged as a human being, but merely as a data point. And second, that the COMPASS's proprietary nature meant that he could not examine or even challenge the algorithm's inner workings. So he could not have a say in whether all those probabilities were weighed correctly. The Wisconsin Supreme Court rejected his claim, saying that due process was not violated so long as the algorithm was used cautiously and never as the sole basis for sentencing. So just because the judge referenced other factors as well, and not only the score, this did not violate Loomis's due process rights. And the court mandated that any pre-sentence report containing such a score must include a written caution explaining what the tool's limitations are. So basically, the Wisconsin court said, as long as the judge is aware that this tool might be biased, and this is just, an algorithm making a statistical inference, and the judge is made aware of this, then everything is fine, and due process rights are not violated. But then, going back to what we discussed about automation bias and technology effect and proprietary nature, it makes you wonder if the judge, even being aware of the fact that this tool contains biases, can actually separate in his or her mind the bias from the actual decision. The Wisconsin Supreme Court seems to think so, but this is very debatable in the behavioral and cognitive literature. 5 more minutes, please. I'm trying to wrap it up. Then the limits of primary agency in AI judicial decision-making, I think, are more of a theoretical debate, as I said, because we do not have primary AI agents yet. I think this is a discussion about the role of feeling and embodiment in rationality, and this is a neuroscience discussion. I think that the underlying debate from what I've read is basically, can or do non-organic entities have agency? Can they develop it? And this is, again, way beyond my capabilities, my research capabilities, but I do think that this is the gist of the problem in that area. And my conclusion based on this research is that we must be very precise about definitions when we talk about black boxness. We must differentiate between what black box is in theory of mind versus in AI models. They're not the same thing. We must be very careful about analogies and metaphors, like memory is just like a library, or memory is just like a storage space. We've seen from neuroscience and cognitive literature that memory in humans doesn't work as memory in computers. Memory is kind of reconstructed every time we access a memory. We kind of follow a recipe that assembles various elements in different areas of the brain. We don't go to a storage space in our brain and retrieve the information. And I do think that these findings need to be integrated in the AI decision-making debate, especially in the law and in how judges use these tools. And finally, of course, that judges and arbitrators must receive specialized training before being allowed to use these tools. Thank you.